a brand new episode of The Witching Hour. You know me, you know Haleigh, and hopefully at this point you also know the third person on this episode of the show. We have writer-director Issa López here. How are you doing?
I'm very happy to be here, and I love it that it's called The Witching Hour, and it's three of us, and it feels a little Eastwicky, which I'm in for, so good.
I feel like Haleigh deserves more credit for this title than I do.
Oh gosh, I feel like that was a whole journey and no one can take credit, but I'm happy with what we ended up with, and I'm so happy to have you here today. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So when we have guests on, we obviously like to talk about the project that they're promoting, but also a little bit about how they got into the genre and filmmaking in general. And just in doing my little bit of research, I was reading up on your time in school, and I was reading that originally you were studying archaeology. So yeah. I was just curious what inspired that interest, and then what inspired you to switch to directing and screenwriting instead.
Well, the truth of the matter, now that I can be honest with myself, first of all, is that archaeology came directly from Indiana Jones. and eventually I realized that what I wanted to do was not to be Indiana Jones, but to make Indiana Jones. So that's how it was transplanted from one to the other.
Do you feel like that background of study influences the way you look at film? Do you take like a history-minded view of film itself?
I don't think so, because I do love history, and when I go into a project that has to do with it, and I just delivered a draft of a Western, and it's fascinating to go down that path. But I found often enough, and this is going to be a very, the reason for endless arguments that I've had, I find that extensive research for me as a writer is a very dangerous path, because you become so excited with the stuff that you're finding in your research that is completely lateral to the center of the story you're telling, that it can be seducing and take you away from what you originally wanted to tell. And it happens a lot to me that years ago, I was writing a script that took place during World War II. And the main character was an American soldier. And I, doing that research, I found about prisoner camps in China, that the Japanese prisoner camps that conducted horrendous human experiments. And we never hear of, I love stuff that we don't often hear of. And certainly that was a big part of my script. And it took me a couple of years of drafts to realize that that was a different movie. And I should just drop the shiny little object and go with the story that I wanted to tell. And that happens every single time. So in this Western, I'm doing my research, and I start going deep into the Mexican-American War. And there's so much stuff we don't know in there, and it starts becoming taking more and more space in the script. And there's this entire curve where I go full history, and eventually I kick history out and I go full story again. It's the difference between history and story. And I think I've done that in my life many times, so starting with picking one career and then going for the other. But we find repeating the same mistakes over and over again, I think.
As long as you learn from the mistakes and you grow having had the experience, that's all that matters.
I always say that the thing we learn by mistakes is to, when we make them again, to go, oh, I already made this one. That's what I find. It's like, oh, yeah, that one. I know that one. Yeah,
I know that feeling well.
Indeed.
When you got into filmmaking, then did you ever kind of envision a very particular path for yourself as far as, the type of film you were going to specialize in, the genre? Because some of your other features, they aren't horror. A lot of them are comedies. So did you always picture yourself as being a comedy director?
Well, no, actually, I remember being in film school, and all my work in film school was very dark and very geeky. and more magical. And at some point, and I was looking at all the other student films around me, and I was like, nobody's making comedy. That's so strange, because you're intense and you're young and you have all these important things to say. And I was like, but comedy is awesome. It would be, can you imagine writing comedy? Well, eventually, what happened is Mexican cinema had disappeared for many, many years. And not until we had multiplexes back in Mexico, there was a space for Mexican cinema to try to compete a little bit with the output from especially the US. And the one thing that exploded and worked for Mexican cinema as a comeback was comedy. And it makes sense. I think humor is a very peculiar cultural thing. And we love to see our particular brand of humor in what we consume. So comedies started to work, and I had a knack. I love it, and I can't stop myself from being goofy ever in life. But even when I go dark, there's usually a moment or two of levity, and even Tigers, which deals with such dark, serious subject matter, there is a lot of comedy in it. I can't help myself. So I went into comedy. It was what worked and what I could sell at that point, and I got a certain name. But eventually, this geek and this huge fan of horror and science fiction comic books wanted to come out, and Tigers was the way to do it.
Having had experience in both genres, because I feel like this is a question that does get asked pretty often, what do you find more difficult, nailing a scare or nailing a laugh?
They're pretty much the same. And here's the thing, I think that as different as those two genres feel, they're not. First of all, they're the two toughest. And usually the two that get least recognition. Comedies are not taken seriously, and you just have to look at the history of awards, in that sense. And the same happens with horror. Not until recently we're having this revival, and it in order to be taken seriously now, it's called, which we all resent, the lovers of the genre, prestige horror. Like, what is that? But anyways. So to achieve an honest to God laugh out moment, and to achieve a true chilling scare, you're trying to poke your audiences deep in the guts. It's a visceral reaction. It's not a cerebral reaction. So it's instinctual, and it's similar in a way. And the other thing that I found, and I've always said, is they're very related in the sense that if you get a horror movie wrong, you're going to end up with a comedy. And if you get a comedy wrong, you're going to end up with a horror movie. So they're pretty much the same.
Okay, I'm getting a huge kick out of that because it's so true.
It's true.
I'm like a little bit obsessed with the through line between comedy and horror, and for all the reasons you said, like that visceral connection that they have with the audience that other genres often strive for but can't quite get there.
Completely.
But the acting is often a very different thing between those two genres. Did you notice a difference in terms of directing your actors?
Well, here's the deal with how I approach directing is I am a massive believer in straight performances, and if you saw Tigers, you saw it. I was striving to get performances from these kids that do not feel like performances, that I was trying to get across a feeling of almost a war documentary, and that the reactions were real. And we went for that to the point that the kids didn't know the script. They never read a single page of it, and we shot chronologically. So they were discovering the events as we were shooting them. So many of the reactions you see in the movie are first impressions of what happens to the characters, and they're real. And I believe I do the same in comedy. In the type of comedy I like to direct is the one where the characters are necessarily suffering horribly. The more the character suffers, the funniest the comedy is. The worse time they're having, the better time we are having. And at these, what I always go with my comedy actors is, you need to be you need to go to this place of true misery and true suffering for us to laugh very honestly. Otherwise, we're not going to defend ourselves from the horror you're going through with laughter if you don't go through horror to that. That said, directing fear, or probably acting fear, I wouldn't know, but getting an actor to a place where they can portray true fear is the toughest thing I've ever seen or asked an actor do. You can fake many emotions, and you can go technical and not method with a lot of emotions. With fear is different. You can go to the physical events of fear, which is you breathe fast, you shake, but it's still not going to come across as fear. In my experience, you have to be really, truly scared for the audience to go, oh, that character is actually scared, and then I can be scared. And again, the two things that have to be real when you say action for the movie to work is laughter. When a character bursts out laughing and it's fake, is one of the most painful things to watch. It has to be an actual laugh. And the same with fear. They have to be actually scared, which was an entire adventure with children to get them, you're not supposed to scare children. And yet you need them to be scared in the scene. And hopefully you're not going to damage anybody's psyche through this process in a way that they're going to hate you for the rest of their lives, So that balance of getting the kids to a place where they could be actually truly scared, but then when I said cut, they could stop being scared and not have nightmares. Those are things that they don't teach you in film school, let me tell you.
So over the course of that process, what are kind of the tips and tricks you picked up in order to make sure you were doing just that with them?
Well, the only thing that worked is I had to transit through the emotions with them, which is not something I had to do with trained actors before that. So not only for fear, but for rage and for grief, and I go through those in the movie. With the children, they would go there if you were there to catch them. So for fear, for example, I would, take the hand of my young actress, Paola Lara is her name. She portrays Estrella in the movie, and she was 11 at the time. And she knew, that this is what's going to give her a tool to give it on the set. And we would find a corner in the location where we were, a dark place, and we would huddle in a corner, and I would make horrible voices that would scare the hell out of me to start with. And, it's just because, guys, come on, let's be honest. You go into that dark room and you start making sinister noises. After a while, you're going to be scared. We've all done it. And I would be scared. And she would feel that. And she would go there with me. And we would both be two silly girls terrified in the corner of a room. And there was a movie crew outside. But we would allow ourselves to go there, which is a thing that you don't do as an adult. And I had to find that place in myself. And then once we found it, I would take her hand and go, you have it. And she would say yes. And I would say, okay, now close your eyes, keep it in, close your eyes, and take her back to the set with her eyes closed, have everybody quiet, set her in the set, let go of her, and say action. And then she could access that emotion. And then when I said cut, I would be like, are you fine? Yes, I'm fine. And she had nightmares the first week. And I felt very responsible. So I had to have a long conversation about the difference between what we were creating and pretending on the set, and the fact that ghosts were real as long as we were on the set and I said action, but when I said cut, they were not real. And the ability to conjure them back for the next take. And it happened. It was so interesting. At the end of the shooting, I didn't need to go to no dark room with her. We would be standing in the middle of the set. As we were ready to do the shot, I would just, put my arm around her shoulders, ask her to close her eyes, ask her to take a deep breath, and whisper a little voice from the mother, and she would go there, and I would be able to do the scene. That was amazing, and that's something I saw them getting to that place that I've seen trained actors struggle with. The fact that the emotion ends when you said cut and there's a real world outside, and be able to transit between those two. And I think it was done in part because of the amazing trust kids are ready to put on you once they decide that you're okay and you're for real and you're taking care of them and you're willing to go there yourself.
So you mentioned before that you kind of like to keep them on their toes by not giving them pages beforehand, but does that limit the amount of takes you're able to get? Is there a point where then they're so familiar with material that you just have to move on?
Oh yeah. Well, you can't move on if you don't have the take. That's the thing, and the magic of wait, what? You get it once or twice, and around take 8 or 9, it wears off. They're kids, So we would find tricks together. It was such an interesting process that, someone would be very angry, perhaps not even on the first one, sometimes it was the shock of the news, and sometimes it would take them a little while to go, to find the full expression of that emotion, but then it would wear out. And it would be like, when they were not hitting that emotional mark after a while, and they knew immediately. And the beauty of it is at some point we had a shorthand where I could simply look up from the monitor and they would look me in the eye and they would be like, yeah, I know. Let's do it again. These are kids that had no acting experience before. It was amazing. And so eventually either I would say, come on, let's talk a little, or they themselves would be like, let's talk, let's find out something. And we would step out of the set and have a little chat of what can we do to help you here, And I do remember, for example, working with the young man that portrayed Shine. His name is Juan Ramon, and I was asking for him. This is a very tough kid, and there's one scene where Estrella catches him with a tear in his eyes because he's thinking about his mother who he lost, and the actor himself has lost both his parents, which I understand because the same thing happened to me in different, his parents and mine were both in for natural causes, but still it's a tremendous experience, and of course it's a lot fresher for him than me, but he knew that I had that experience, so he would ask me to be able to use it. He would say, what makes you sad about not having that mom and dad? And I would be very honest with him and say, you know what really gets to me? The fact that they're never going to be able to see this movie we're making right now. And as I was saying it, I would get emotional, and he would pick up on that and take that emotion that I was going through myself and work with it. So you develop this give and take mechanism where often enough I had to dig in those emotions myself, which is something that you're not supposed to do when you direct, because chances are you're a terrible actor. I am. But I was not acting for them. I would never do that. I was finding the emotion and the true actual emotion and offering it to them, which again is something that they don't teach nor in film school nor in therapy, let me tell you. you're going into, let me look into my drawer of emotions that I don't want to deal with right now. Hey, here's a horrible trauma. Do you want it? So it ended up being beautifully therapeutic, I think. And it was great to see these kids dissecting these emotions of their own, to see what worked and going through them when usually they don't. And many of them came from environments where it's not nurtured, that exploration of emotions, So I think it was very positive for everyone involved. Scary, but intense and beautiful.
The way you talk about working with child actors is so lovely and beautiful, and obviously that is not the reputation of working with child actors in the film industry. Was this a project that was like hard to pitch people? Did you get a lot of like, no, that's dark and way too many kids?
Oh yeah, I mean the dark part for sure. Movies with kids, yeah, everybody wants to see one and put them out there, especially if it's for kids. This movie is with kids, but not for kids. That was very confusing. It's a story about children, but not for children. And bad things happen in this movie, and that's a big rule in cinema, that nothing bad can happen to the pets or the kids, right? So it was tough. That said, nobody questioned that I could find or direct the kids or direct the performances, which I found interesting because I was terrified myself. As happens, you're pitching something as like, oh my God, I got it. We're gonna find them. They're out there. And meanwhile, the inner voice was like, I want to see that. I want to see you finding not one, not two, but 5 kids that can give this ultra real performances, and that you can get those performances out of them, because you don't do this, girl. You direct the actors that are trained. And my last experience with children was when I was very young. I directed a bunch of segments for Sesame Street, the Mexican version, and that was fun. But it's a very different tone than what I was going for here. So, you fake it until you make it. That's how you do it. You pretend that you know what you're doing.
I don't want to jump ahead so far, but I am curious what happened and what was going through your mind when you finished the film, because I know you had a very difficult time kind of getting it placement on the festival circuit, and I, for the life of me, I can't understand it. I can't put myself in the shoes of a programmer who watches this screener and says, this is not worthy of my film festival. So what was it like when you started to get those rejections? Were you truly shocked?
I was shocked is a big word, because it would mean that you were that sure about your own work, and you're never that. You're never that. It doesn't matter. I mean, you shouldn't. You should not. I think that you should ever always question how good it was and how much better it could have been, or otherwise you become complacent. But what happened is, I finished the movie, and it was a long post-production process. We had very little money, again, because it was a hard pitch, and we had visual effects, and the sound design was made by the same sound designer that worked with Guillermo del Toro in Pan's Labyrinth and in Hellboy, and that makes every single Iñárritu movie. So we wanted to wait for his window, because we were not paying the big bucks. It was about passion. So we had to wait for a lot of incredibly talented people to make time for the movie, the composer, all of them. And we had a very long post-production process, an entire year. And when the movie was done, me and the producing team, we felt that we had not a genius movie, but a thing that felt unique enough, that it was approaching a subject matter in a particular way, which was going into the ravages of the drug war in Latin America and what it makes happen around children. but doing it through horror and a ghost story and magical realism. And we hadn't seen that mixed. So we thought that was unique enough to perhaps get us in the festival circuit. And we got rejection after rejection for an entire year. We applied to Sundance, to South by Southwest, Tribeca, Berlin, certain sections of Cannes, Venice, San Sebastian, all of the festivals. And we got rejection after rejection after rejection after rejection. And when you get 2 or 3, you might think that someone might have missed whatever is special with the movie. But when you get the 6th and the 7th, you start questioning if the movie has any value and if you as a filmmaker are actually on the right path. Maybe I should have gone back to archaeology school. I don't know. But I would, at the same time, the team was sending the movie out to producers in LA, and the response was amazing. People were touched by the movie, and they wanted to sit down and wanted to meet me, and they wanted to know in what festival was it going to open. And I was, just dancing around that, like, hey, we're trying to figure. Nobody was taking it. But I had that feeling that it was still connecting with people. I couldn't understand what the hell was going on. To this date, I suspect the movie was not seen by the screening processes, because later we got invited to some of the festivals that we had got rejected from, and I would say, "Hey guys, but you rejected us," and they would be shocked, and I would be like, "Here's a letter." So, and they were honestly coming back and saying, "I never saw it," which I hope invited to a more careful screening process. I hope.
Huh. I mean,
Yeah.
that sounds like the only logical response to me, which, it's like it's upsetting to hear something like that. But at the same time, it's encouraging that something like this wasn't kind of pushed out of a lineup like that, because I also feel like another thing that we're constantly dealing with is whether or not you should go down the route of doing something completely different that will make it stand out on a film festival lineup, or going with the trend and giving them what the whole industry and the box office, for that matter, seems to want at the time.
It's either or in the spectrum, and throughout the process, the movie of making the movie and post-producing the movie, a lot of voices around you go into, it doesn't feel indie enough for the festival circuit. There is this very successful way to make certain type of film in Latin America that are adored in the festival circuit, and the movies are supposed to feel rough and half-baked, and there's a certain type of performance that is adored, and it feels a lot more amateurish, and sometimes I suspect that the directors actually could do better than that, but that's the tone that is fashionable, or was at the time in the festival circuit. And I did get a couple of notes of it feels too well done, which was like, wait, what? You want me to make it shittier? So it's accepted. And on the other hand, for commercial and industrial and as a horror movie, it was like, it feels too indie. It feels too raw. It feels too real. So my feeling is my movie is falling between those two lands. It doesn't feel raw enough for the festival circuit, for the prestige circuit, but it doesn't feel polished enough or shiny or pretty enough for the mainstream circuit. So, and that has happened because I love to tackle movies that are neither or, but both, and maybe even something of their own. That's what I strive for. Often enough, I had run into that wall. It felt recognizable. But I was convinced that particularly the fact that it didn't completely belong here or here, but was its own animal, was what it was going to give it a chance. And I was right. when audiences they beautifully keep coming back to the movie and being so impressed by it and beautifully putting it out on social media and coming out and saying it, it's because it's unexpected. So, there it is. I do believe after this experience that if you're stubborn enough, the good guys can win. I was very, very, very happy. I'm still very happy. And there's days that I still can't believe how gorgeous the journey has been with tigers.
Well, it is finally coming to DVD and Blu-ray and Steelbook and all that, which yay. But it, went to Shudder at first, and that's are you finding as a filmmaker that streaming is maybe these new outlets are the place where the films that don't fit in those traditional models have a better shot?
Well, first of all, it gives them a life. The movie had its theatrical release in the fall of 2019. And that was beautiful because even though it was playing in one theater in this city and then going to, and it's very small and very specific, it got it continued this buzz that started in the genre festival circuit, because once it was taken by one, it was taken by all of them. It was great. But then it went into a theatrical release, and the theatrical release gave us access to reviews, which matters, and it gets you to have a certain score in Rotten Tomatoes. That matters, and for some big names in genre to be curious and watch it, and then go on social media about it. All of that helps. That said, then the movie went on Shudder, and Shudder, from the moment they saw it at Fantastic Fest where it opened, they stepped up and said, we want this movie. And it was a very long journey for us to secure the rights, because the rights were in part for the distribution in the US and English-speaking territories were in part given because I needed to take all the money I could. So there were some pre-sold things, and Shudder needed universal rights. So that negotiation took forever, but eventually it dropped by the end of 2019. And it's beloved in the platform. And nobody has championed the movie the way that Shudder did. And what is gorgeous about it is that once your theatrical run is over, and it doesn't matter if the movie is a massive hit, theatrical runs are short. They're, when in the 70s and early 80s, you could have a movie which would play for a year. That doesn't exist, but it exists in streaming. And every time that someone goes on Twitter or on Instagram and saying, I love this movie, and someone else sees it, they can simply look for it and access the movie. So the movie never stops going strong. However, the fact that you have access to physical release is like the final incarnation that is gorgeous, because it allows for whatever filmmaker dreams of, which is all the extras. Making a movie is such a tough process, and you work for so long chasing a vision that you end up with this massive cachet of visual references, set photographs, set designs, casting calls. When we worked on the making of the movie, I didn't want a 5-minute talking heads as usually is made. I wanted a featurette of how we made this movie, because it was kind of a miracle, and how I worked with the kids. And so we made 45 minutes of how we made a movie. And then when it opened in Toronto Film Festival in 2019 for the commercial run, Guillermo del Toro, who has championed the movie, and it's been amazing, presented the movie in Toronto and made a Q&A with me, which I felt that after that I could die a happy person. But it's an hour of a joy of an interview where we had a lot of fun and we had a lot of laughter, and that's part of the extras of this. So it's the perfect way to close a tough, complicated adventure that hit all of the things that you wanted. It was finally accepted in the festivals. It had its theatrical run. It is in streaming, and now you can have the steelbook with all those luxury little gifts. And then I'm done with tigers, hopefully.
Then that paves the way to future opportunities and wonderful collaborations. Like, I'm assuming the Western that you were just referencing was your werewolf Western, right?
It is. Now I'm writing another Western. No. It's only one Western, and it's a werewolf Western. And Del Toro, after watching the movie, which from the moment I was writing the script, I thought he was going to respond to this material. And it was impossible to get to him. He's, of course, one of the most busy filmmakers out there. And, when I was writing, I remember like, well, I'm Mexican. He's Mexican because there's so few of us. It's not going to be that hard. I know people that knows him. It was impossible. And even with the movie finished, I could not get him to watch, and I didn't know him. And not until the movie started getting the amazing reviews, and the comparisons were constant in a good light. I was kind of worried because the movie does this thing that Del Toro does so beautifully, which is it deals with a very harsh reality through the eyes of children, and the horrors, the supernatural horrors that surround childhood. And that's Del Toro, right? So of course the comparisons arise, but the gritty nature of the movie, where the movie is more City of God, or is more that Latin American cinema, is what sets it apart from Guillermo's work and an influence. But Guillermo finally was curious enough, saw it, and as I suspected, responded to it, and became a champion, and started talking about the movie. It was beautiful. And eventually he reached out and said, I'm going to produce a movie that you write and direct. And we started looking at options, and he came to me with this idea for a werewolf Western. And I loved it because who would think of a werewolf Western directed by a Mexican woman director? It's such an odd combination. I would definitely want to see that. And I always want to make the movies that I want to see. So it is very dark. It is very violent. It's a lot of fun. And I delivered the second draft just at the beginning of the lockdown. Guillermo is figuring out himself because his own production of Nightmare Alley was halted through this. So he's juggling through that, and I'm waiting on my notes.
Curious, what is it about werewolf and Western where one kind of brings something new out of the other? Why that combination?
I think that there are several things. One is there's something about the white young America trying to take over a wild older America, a wild older continent, native continent, and trying to crush something more mysterious and more mystical with the weight of what's civil and what the Western civilization implies, and under that there is something darker that you can't repress, and the clash between those two is what makes the Western, I think, and what makes the werewolf too. So it's a beautiful marriage.
The werewolf genre is interesting because a lot of horror genres, you look at the classic monsters, you can look at vampires or zombies, and there's just countless great movies made about those creatures. Not so with werewolves. There's a very limited amount. So what is sort of your take on like the werewolf genre and what you want to bring to it and what excites you about that opportunity?
Well, you're completely right that there's a bunch of werewolf movies, indeed, but very few of them are really good. A lot of them are a lot of fun,
Yeah.
But very few of them are really good, and even less scary. Because there's something innately, naturally scary about a man or a woman that is trying to contain a monster, and then that monster exploding. That's what I'm fascinated with. How you can't repress what you really are, what's inside you. But that said, it can be incredibly goofy to turn into a large dog. So it's tough. And there's amazing examples of when it's well done, like Ginger Snaps, or like The American Werewolf in London, or Howling, I think. But it is a tough genre, and you have to be very careful for it to not be stupid, downright stupid. And the stupid is good, as I was saying. I love comedy. I don't want to make a comedy out of this one. I definitely don't want to make a comedy out of this one. So it is a challenge. It is scary in the way that Tigers was scary, because it was all based on kids. I had to go into visual effects, which is not something that Latin American cinema is particularly known for. All of that seemed so daunting and so risky. But if you're not going down risky, I think it's not worth exploring. You have to be, David Bowie used to say, and I love that quote, that you have to feel as an artist a little bit like when you're going into the ocean, and the place where your toes stop feeling the sand, that is the right place to tell a story. And definitely, I stopped feeling the sand a while ago. So this is a good place.
I'm so excited for you. Another thing I love about what you do, even beyond what you've given to us on the screen, is your presence on social media. So why is it important to you to be such an active member of the community on Twitter? And when the time comes, are you eager to kind of jump into that community further by going to some of the horror conventions?
Well, yeah, no, definitely. It was something that was not able to do before the movie got taken over by the horror festivals, which I definitely adore, and I love the teams, and it was a great experience. So that has to happen. About social media is I like all of us, I think I have a love-hate relationship, because those are all my relationships. I love-hate relationships anyway. But the truth about Twitter is it has been incredibly, incredibly generous to me. I think I got to Del Toro, yes, in part because the movie was creating a buzz, but I think the fans of the movie that manifested in social media and that would say, I love the movie. It feels a little bit like a greedier Del Toro. Has he seen it? I would go like, nope, but you can tag him and tell him. and people did, and I think it had an effect. Then, of course, part of what propelled the movie at the start of it was the fact that Stephen King on Twitter went and said beautiful things about the movie. And that was very meaningful at the beginning. And through Twitter, too, I was able to reach Neil Gaiman, who is my absolute third god in this journey, and have him watch the movie. And I knew he was going to respond to it as he did. So it allowed me to first follow and then put out what I was doing for these gods in a way. And then the other thing is a way, it's a beautiful way for people who appreciate the movie and connect with it to say, hey, I hear you. I saw what you did there. And that justifies the entire adventure of the rejections and everything. When you realize someone in Brazil or in Amsterdam or in Boston or in Scotland, they come out and said, your movie touched me. And it's gorgeous. I love it.
For what it's worth, all of that love that was directed at you, I feel like you put back out there because it feels like you're always sharing stuff and celebrating other people's work too. And that's what makes that community so special to me, is that it keeps going around and around, and we're all there to lift each other up and enjoy this stuff together.
I mean, first and foremost, I'm a fangirl. So, and I'm a firm believer that, I would never go on social media to say X movie or X book. It's just like, it didn't matter to me. Why would you, when you could rather use that space and that moment to praise something that you're excited about, right? So, and the gorgeous is, because of the incredible moment we're living with genre, the amount of amazing shit we have around is crazy. So I rather have to restrain myself, because otherwise it's going to feel like I like everything. And then it doesn't matter what you like, So I have to refrain myself from raving a lot about this stuff. And with the stuff that I'm not excited about, life's too short, even when days are endless, like right now. And if you're not enjoying an experience, reading or watching, just to stop, watch something else. There's a lot of incredible stuff there. And what is amazing is how many times I've went out to say something nice about the work of someone else, and how many times people that I admire and respect, like, well, these guys, but Joe Dante went out a couple of days ago to talk about tigers, and a bunch of incredible horror masters have done it. And so it makes you want to make a next one that, once again, is liked and appreciated by the people who taught you how to tell a scary story.
So
Beautiful.
You say you're a really big fangirl in general. So what have you been fangirling over lately? Is there any new thing out there that's really caught your eye that you want to celebrate?
I'm in a spree of all things right now. And I had this moment where I was watching every single new series, and it started to create a little noise in my head. I was like, I think it would be very helpful to go into all things that I loved as a young person, before even I was a storyteller, a professional one. I've always been a storyteller, and see through the eyes of someone that has gone through the process of making movies. So I've been going through old treasures. I just rewatched Blade Runner for the first time in ages. And I'm amazed, because, when you watch all the stuff, a lot of it, you still feel the love, but you go like, oh, that feels old. Oh, wow, that felt old. But Blade Runner doesn't. It's crazy how on point of so many things that we're going through right now, it touches on. But that is the old. I'm finishing right now the new book by Stephen King. It's called If It Bleeds. It has a sequel to The Outsider, which really felt like a very good adaptation of King's work. And there's so much. When you have Kubrick doing some of your work, it's very tough to say that you have a good adaptation, but The Outsider is good. And the book is really amazing. It is 4 short novellas. And there's particularly one, the second one, called The Life of Chuck, that is so unexpected. I'm in awe of how that man, with so many books, can still completely surprise us. How does he do that? I can't imagine. I finished reading a comic book called My Favorite Thing is Monsters by Emil Ferris. It's gorgeous. It's about a young fangirl who is obsessed with the Wolf Man and the Invisible Man and vampires, and there's a dead in the building she lives on, and she starts trying to break it apart with the tools that she's learned in horror. I let me think. I'm reading the work of an Argentinian horror writer named Mariana Enriquez, whose new novel is astounding, but it's still not translated to English. It's coming at the end of the year. In the meantime, she has a collection of short stories called What We Lost in the Fire, and they're horror stories set in the harsh reality of Latin America, which is my favorite territory. And it's scary as hell. So it's beautiful. I just saw The Platform. What the hell? I loved it. I love that movie. It surprised me so much.
It's so good.
About The Platform. I would say we probably talked about The Platform just as much as we've talked about tigers, and probably also Sea Fever at this point too. It's been very hot topics lately.
We have this. This is going to sound terrible, but it's going to sound terrible. But I'm going to go there. In Mexico, when I grew up, my father was Spanish, so Spanish culture is very central to who I am and very dear to me. But it's a love-hate relationship, like everything in my life, right? So, and when I grew up, we had when a Star Wars would play on TV, it was the Spanish dubbed version, which was hilarious. I mean, you would have. C-3PO, and because the Spanish are so correct in the way they use language, it would be C-3PO. Hola, soy C-3PO. We Mexicans kids would go for ages into, hey, Luke Skywalker, ¿qué estás haciendo? So the accent is sometimes tough for genre for us. However, some of the best horror and science fiction and genre directors out there are Spanish. But when I played the trailer for The Platform, I had this little moment of them going, "Estás en el hoyo," that I was like, I will not be able to watch this. But then when all the reviews started coming on, I was like, no, I will. It's amazing. It's such a simple concept. And you know what I love? I love that he never explains why, where, how, because it really doesn't make sense, but you don't need it to make sense. You just need to know the rules that this guy has to go through. That's it. You're in the hole, like himself. You're in for the adventure. It's amazing. It's so well executed. The performance is everything. I loved it. I was wrong about Estás en el hoyo. No, it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's definitely a recent favorite for everyone over at Collider. Yeah. We can't let you go over today because I know you have a very busy schedule, but I've kind of asked you one of our usual go-to questions, which is what are you watching or reading in genre right now? But we do have one other go-to, and I'm going to give that one to Haleigh.
Well, first of all, incredible answer to the last one. I feel like that's one of the best, like, I'll take notes later and go look all of that up. That was very insightful.
Thank you.
But the very important final question is, do you have any pets?
Oh, wow. Well, just because I was talking about them yesterday. I grew up with dogs. My father was a hunter, which, now as an adult, I stopped eating meat because I love animals so much, and animal pain is something I can't endure. And I think it's related to the fact that you rebel against the way you were brought up, So my father was also, I was raised by my father because my mother died when I was very young. I was 8. So my dad raised us, and I love my dad dearly. Before everybody else knew, I love the man, and he, I think he didn't do a complete shit job in bringing me up. So. But he even though he had dogs and loved them, he hunted, which for me has always been this strange thing of either you love animals or you kill them for fun, but different generations. And so my relationship with animals was complicated because of that, although I adore them. And my sister became a veterinarian to that point, and she also doesn't eat meat now. But I didn't have dogs or cats or anything as an adult because I used to live in very small apartments and it's complicated. But eventually I couldn't resist it, and I rescued a chocolate Labrador that is one of those animals that in the stores they can't sell because she had a big scar, a gash, and you see the puppy getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger in the box, and that eventually. So I found out, and I kept in touch, and when they called me to say it's not going to sell and we're going to, and I was like, I'll get the puppy. So I got her, and she spent 14 years with me, and her name was Kanika, and she was the most obnoxious, unsufferable lady. I mean, she didn't like to be pet, but sometimes she would feel like come to you and put her head on your knee. Don't touch me much. But she was adorable, and I loved her dearly. And I had to put her down. She was 14, almost 15 at the time, near the time that I wrote Tigers. And the reason I wrote Tigers in part was because my entire life was falling apart. I hadn't shot a movie in 7 years. My latest project had fallen apart. I went through a breakup. My father died, and then I had to put down the dog. And I had nothing. I realized that one thing I could do was make a movie. And I wrote Tigers from that place of pain. And I thought I was never going to have another dog because I had that dog and it was so special. And eventually my veterinarian sister called me and said, hey, I had this other chocolate Labrador that someone found on the street and we can't find the owners. Can you foster it? And I know what you're doing. And it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And I got the dog. It was male. His name was Chulo, which in Spanish means gorgeous and pimp. And he was both. And he was with me for 5 years, and I put it down last year, and I miss him miserably.
Oh.
And so those were my two choc labs, my rescues. And I keep saying I'm never going to have another one. That was enough. But I know myself. So right now I have no pets.
We've all said that before.
Yeah.
like we say, I'm never going to fall in love again.
Yeah. I know that.
I feel like apparently being a pet lover and a genre lover just goes hand in hand. So it's meant to be.
It's meant to be, but then it's so mysterious why we kill so many animals in the movies, right? In the fiction.
Yes.
But it's amazing. People used to, some fans in Mexico used to make the fun note that if it's not a proper Issa López movie if an animal is not killed in it. And I don't think I killed any animals in Tigers. No, I kill a lot of people, but not animals. I keep, children die in Tigers, but animals are fine. I think I broke that spell. But I find that it's so compelling and shocking, the death of an animal. It's such a dramatic moment. So I used to put it in a lot of my scripts because it's a core shaker for me.
Yeah, I think we feel the exact same way. We gotta let you go and continue promoting your movie. That's another thing that I think you've done extremely well is like you have been out there pushing this thing through every single phase of the process, back to the beginning when you were first making it, to trying to get it on the festival circuit, to when it finally did get a release, and now that we're getting it for at-home viewing on May 5th. You can get it on DVD and Blu-ray Steelbook. So Issa, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Really
my pleasure to finally meet you guys, and how much fun this was. Great.
All right, guys, that is it. You've all officially survived the witching hour.